This motorcycle behind you, the XA, how rare is that?
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty rare, but in the interest of your average Harley owner, it's a completely different motorcycle when you look across the board at what it was made for. It's a German motorcycle and its roots from the BMW R30. And so as a horizontally opposed engine, the bike was really meant to go into Rommel's African campaign and prevent the failure of the rear V-twin cylinder by having the cylinder side-to-side cooling better in fresh air. So shaft-driven, 4-speed trans, 750cc or 45 cubic inch, whichever way you like to look at it. It's got a real nice feel to it, and it's very smooth. I love the way the engine fires. You can hardly feel any vibration because the pistons are opposing each other. There's no vibration from a single or a V-twin shooting them up and down. Yeah. It's completely different. I know that in the World War II, you know, the Japanese were taking our bikes apart to remanufacture them using basically the same specs, and that's kind of what we did with the BMW. Basically ripped their bike apart. It's really rough sand cast in the engine pieces, but in the frame area, it is Harley Davidson. It's the same rear suspension and front suspension they had run. As you see, it's a fork spring, but the springer on the front of it's probably worth more than the rest of the bike to the mod guys because they used the really wide tire on the bikes for sand. There was only 100 of them built with the wider tire that actually have that disc wheel, and there was another 900 that were built with regular spoke wheels and different front suspensions that weren't the same thing. And by the time they actually got all these prototypes built between Indian and Harley Davidson, we'd already moved into Europe, so that whole thing was basically just a hiccup in what was going on in the war. Yeah. We were already out of Africa, and there was no further interest in using them. So bikes like this never got commissioned. Most of them were still in their crates, and they went to surplus salvage when they eventually did something to move them on. Mm-hmm. So kind of a shame in that interest, but my granddad as a farmer, I mean, he loved that bike. He's had 3 of them. And for getting around the long distance runs they had to do to run irrigation, turn stuff on and off, it was an ultimate tool for getting around the properties and doing what he had to do. He wore one out, completely destroying the crank in it. And my dad found a dealer in Fontana that actually had a lot of the surplus parts on the shelf he was purchasing because people were buying the surplus bikes in the Southland. He got to the point where he wasn't moving anything. And he said, you know, I'd really like to get rid of everything. If you're interested in a crank, how about if I make you a deal on, it was around 100 piston sets, you know, rods, all the associated gaskets, everything for that engine. And he gave him a deal over the counter to haul a huge crate of stuff out for about the price of what he was going to spend on the crank anyway. And I still got most of that. My granddad did have about 40 plus motorcycles in his collection. Shoved against the wall, backwards, forwards. I mean, just, they were never going to be used again, never looked at, but he didn't do anything to get rid of them either. So he was one of the fortunate ones that kept him within his means. When he passed away, a friend of our family bought most of those bikes and put them right out to people that are interested in doing restorations. And I'm talking knuckleheads, JDs, a lot of flatheads, and every bike in its own right now would be highly sought after. So kudos to him for at least hanging on to them, you know.
The ultimate barn find.
Exactly. It was a huge collection.
With your background in motocross, as a kid who watched On Any Sunday,
oh yeah,
how many times did you see that movie?
I still watch it probably 2 or 3 times a month.
Yeah.
I'm sure I've seen it over 1,000 times. I've worn out a bunch of videotapes and the DVDs. I mean, who doesn't want to just fire that thing up and get back in the mood again every time you turn it on? It just takes you back to that same place. It took me 40 years to finally meet Malcolm himself, but I've seen his son on different rides. He's a avid rally bike champion in his own right. He shows up and kind of carries the torch for Malcolm.
I see you still have your bikes. You get a chance to get out there once in a while?
This is my backyard. Looking north from the summit of the Cajon Pass here, You have Tehachapi to the west, probably 60 miles. Death Valley to the northeast, 120. Randsburg, Barstow, everything in between all of that is all riding area, and it's beautiful. I love commuting through the desert. The Husky Monument, if anyone's heard of that, is a real popular destination ride. Yeah. My dad's interred there. I got his ashes in a vault in an epitaph, and he'd been there hundreds of times and loved the place, so it just seemed like the perfect fitting place to take him and put him when it came time. And I think I'll probably end up there too.